2. Blessed life of a genius. Though no one spoke about it, I always knew I was an accident. It would have been obvious to anyone who looked at my mom's photo albums. Me, Mum, where was y'all at here? Mum, I think that's when we went to some island in Florida. Me, huh? How'd y'all get island money? Mum, that was before you were born. We took a family trip to Key West. Me, what's Key West? Turns page. Mum, what's that tree Kenneth is swinging on? Mum, oh, that was a poplar tree. Your father built a swing on that tree. Me, a swing. Okay. I kept turning pages asking where they were in different photos since I'd never had the luxury of traveling. I asked about the sharp suit Dad was wearing. And about Mom's fancy hairdo. I saw my brother eating cake and holding ice cream in pictures, sitting next to Dad, who looked healthy, with firm muscles and good hair. They looked so happy and well off. Then I came along. As soon as I was born, the pictures in the photo album changed. There were no tree houses or wooden swings or new bicycles. Dad didn't have sharp clothes. Mom's hair wasn't done. There were no more trips. Everything got a little more poor. Me, how come the furniture went away when I came around? Mum, we had to cut back, son. The only nice thing I ever got back then was a dog. We lived on 15th Street and Erie Avenue, in the heart of North Philadelphia. It was a tough area where shit happened consistently. One afternoon, my dad came home with a huge Labrador. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy, I couldn't stop screaming. I fell in love with that dog instantly. What's this, Spoon? My mum asked when she saw it. There was a note of skepticism in her voice. You got a dog? I bought a dog for the boys, my dad said with forced nonchalance. They been talking about a dog. This dog wasn't a puppy. It was full grown, with a tongue as big as my arm. And fur that looked like old paper that had been left in the sun too long. It was probably 7. But it didn't matter to my brother and me. We'd been wanting a pet for so long. We named him Tramp and brought him into our room to play. He was on the bed, licking our faces, when the doorbell rang. I walked over to take a look. There was a man and a woman I hadn't seen before. You took our dog, they said. You're what? My dad asked, as if he'd never heard anything so preposterous. You took our dog, they repeated. She got loose and was running down the street, and the neighbors saw you take her and bring her here. What's going on? My mum jumped in. I thought you said you bought this dog. I didn't, my dad protested. I could see his wheels spinning as he quickly thought of a lie. A friend of mine had it. I gave him money for it. Coco, the woman called. The dog came bounding out of my room, stopped at her feet, and nuzzled against her leg. They walked out of the house with their pet, and that was one of my earliest memories, getting and losing my first dog, all within 15 minutes. I suppose that was also my first life lesson. What's here today may be gone later today. Nothing is permanent. Especially my father. On a day I was too young to remember, he disappeared for 4 years. My dad happens to be here with me as I'm writing this, and he wants to explain for the first time why he went away. So I'm going to slide over and let him onto the keyboard. Here are a few words from Henry Witherspoon on what he feels happened at that time. Buckle up and prepare to enter the mind that shaped and molded me. Go ahead, Dad. 3. 4 years gone. By Henry Spoon Witherspoon. All right, all right, all right. I guess I gotta tell this story. For my son Kevin, I'd do anything in the world. For him. Because he's my son. Who I'd do anything in the world for. First of all, you ever deal with a public defender? I don't recommend it. I was this motherfucker's first case. Kev, is it okay to use motherfucker in your book? Kev. Fuck it. Here's what happened. Now, I come up on my bike to this house and they shootin' dice. So I shot dice. I'm gambling, but I got shot. I said, let me go home and grab some more money. I'll be right back. When I come back, it's dark. I get up there, I don't pay this place no mind. I'm in a game. I know where we ain't, but I ain't really paying attention to where we at. All I know is that the windows are boarded up. Shit, I knew people that lived in houses with windows boarded up, so that don't mean nothing to me. I knock on the door. Ain't nobody answering. Makes sense, they got a game going on. I go in. I think, hey, the lights are out. I'm half high. Actually, I'm whole. High. The whole of me is high. I take a few steps and I trip over something. I feel around and it's a body. I don't know if it's alive or dead or sleeping or high. I pull it to the door to see what the situation is, cause there ain't no light in there. Suddenly, a cop opens the door. I ask him to help me. Next thing I know, I'm handcuffed. That's what happened. This is God's honest truth, Kev. I figure the cop had seen me walk into the building. Now, this cop gave a statement that he looked through the window and saw me having sex with this body I was dragging. Mind you, the body was alive and he told me it was a woman. But that ain't even possible. How do you see through this piece of shit? Boarded up window into a totally dark house. I couldn't even tell myself if it was a man or a woman. They got this girl in court 18 months later cause she didn't wanna come. They had me sitting in the detention center that whole time. When she got there, she told I don't know what happened. I don't know him. Never seen him before. I don't even know how I got there. I was drinking. There's no way I should have gone to jail, but I did. I went to jail for a rape that I didn't commit. These are straight up facts, Kev. You know Nancy and her sisters. They wouldn't be speaking to me if it had happened. They told me they were sitting next to these cops while they was out in the waiting room and the cops were concocting the story that they wanted to tell. So I wind up getting 4 to 8 years. Themes the kind of charges though. They let me go home before my 4 years were up. So here I go coming home from the roughest penitentiary in Pennsylvania. And Nancy is expecting me to be one way, but I done changed. She hoping I'll be a perfect husband now. She's still trying to run my life and pick my friends. She wanting me to get a job when won't nobody hire me with that jail time. She wanting too many changes too fast. But I had to be as rough as these people in this jail to survive. I got harder, you see. And I couldn't turn that shit on and off like it's a light bulb or something. She didn't understand. What you don't know, Kev, is that one day I come in and I'm trying to talk to her, and I guess she had a lot of pent up anger in her. She started hollering and cussing and getting in my face. I'm mature and I'm not gonna let myself be spoken to that way. So I grabbed her and I told her she better listen. She broke away and ran to the bed, reached under her side between the mattress and the springs and pulled out a hammer of mine that I hadn't seen in a couple of weeks. I think on my feet. I looked at this and I told her, now if you raise that hammer at me, I'ma beat the shit out of you. That kind of toned her down with that hammer. But at the same time, it let me know how far we had gone and how unhappy I'd made this woman. Right then and there I knew that this shit was over. So I just said, to hell with this. We done. And I go on about my business. 4. All about my amazing shoulders. When most parents want to break bad news to their kid, they sit them down, place a hand over theirs, get real serious, and have a heart-to-heart talk. My dad never did that. Instead, he would appear out of nowhere and start laying heavy shit on me in an offhand, matter-of-fact way, like he was talking about what he ate for breakfast. Dad, hey, you got a brother and sister. Your brother is the same age as you. Your sister is a little older. They've been around for a long time. Me, huh? Dad, you heard me. Go over there and say hi to your brother and he'll say hi back. Me, who? Dad, that's your brother right there on the corner. I forgot to tell you. Just go. Me, alright. Dad, also, me and your mother ain't together no more. I'm leaving the house. Me, wait, what? Dad, look, I still want to come by from time to time. I just gotta get out. Nance. And I ain't seeing eye to eye. Me, okay. I'm gonna cry, Dad. This one kinda hurts a little bit. Dad, you'll be alright. Don't be a bitch. Me, okay. I held the tears back. I wanted to show my dad that I could handle this information. It still hurt, of course, but I refused to let it hurt for long. To this day, my brother thinks I got over it so quickly because I was young. And he protected me. But I think that I was born with a gift, the shoulder shrug. For as long as I can remember, I've had the ability to shoulder shrug things too. Just accept them, say okay, and get on with my life. The opposite of shoulder shrugging would be to get depressed or angry and to hold on to those emotions for the rest of my life. But for whatever reason, whether it was because my father was matter of fact about the heaviest stuff or God put something in me, I've been able to take in all kinds of experiences and information and process them without holding on to any negative emotion afterward, even at a young age. It upset Kenneth a lot more. He still remembers my mum chasing my dad with a knife after he broke the news, as well as my dad's last words when he left. I wasted 2 good nuts on ya, asked Nance. 5. The selfless love of a father. When he walked out, my dad promised that I'd still see him. For a while, I did. And I remember every single time, because the scariest and most heart-stopping things in my childhood all happened under the supervision of my father. Nearly every memory of my dad is of him exposing me to a violent or dangerous situation. He didn't do it on purpose. It was just the way he lived his life. And by being with him, I lived that life too. Memory 1. For one of our first adventures after he left, Dad picked my brother and me up at Mom's apartment. We asked where we were going. His answer, we're just going somewhere. When you're a kid, there are 1,000 questions that come up at this point. Where's somewhere? How long will we be there? Who else is going? What are we gonna do? But my dad never gave us opportunities for questions. He didn't act or think like any other person I'd ever met, so he could have been taking us anywhere. And this day, he had something special planned. He took us to what looked like a pond in New Jersey to rent a motorboat so we could go fishing. While we were on the water, I asked if I could drive, and he said, "Go ahead, Kev, I don't see why not." A few reasons why not might have included the fact that I was 8, I'd never been in a boat before in my life, and I'd never driven anything besides a bike. But my dad didn't live in the world of reason. He was a firm believer in the go ahead school of parenting. Whatever we asked to do, he'd just say, "Go ahead." He handed me the tiller like I'd been a boat captain my whole life, and I started driving. No more than a minute passed before I heard him saying, "Better slow up. You gonna hit that boat." He didn't reach out to grab the tiller from me. He just sat there cool as can be, repeating, "You better slow up. Boy, you ain't slowing up." I was frozen in place with my hand on the throttle, and I couldn't remember which direction slowed the boat. I guessed and turned the handle to my right. I guessed wrong. The boat sped up and bam, smacked into another boat. I destroyed both boats. All my dad had to say was, "Damn it, boy, you're done." Did this one bad. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't even seem pissed off. It was like I'd knocked over a cheap vase. He told the guy we rented the boat from, "My son done fucked the boat up, so we'll figure it out." As best I can tell, what my dad figured out was to never go back there again. Memory 2. The next time I remember being with my dad, my brother and I were walking along a street in our neighborhood with him. I'll never know where he was taking us, because out of nowhere, a group of guys jumped him. My brother and I stood there, shocked, as they started pummeling Dad. "Go. Run home," my dad told us coolly between punches, as if we were leaving him with friends. "I'll meet you back there. Go ahead. I'll be alright." So we went home and sat in the kitchen terrified, hoping he'd come back alive. An hour or so later, he strolled in the door covered in blood and casually asked, "You alright? You want something to eat?" He didn't even mention the fight. It was as if nothing had happened. The only other time I saw him that bloody was after he got hit by that axe. I asked him about it much later, and he explained that he went to the home of someone named Mr. Jimmy. There was a man underneath the refrigerator who'd been struggling to repair it for 2 hours. My dad said, "Move out the way," and fixed it. The next thing he knew, the other repairman chopped him with an axe, presumably for taking the job away. This is how my father concluded the story, coincidentally, a couple of weeks later. That sucker was found dead. I don't know nothing about it. This is how I responded, Dad, I don't want to know nothing about it either. Memory 3. My mum was out and my cousins Anthony and Daryl were over. They were with my father, who was visiting and watching a video that my mum wouldn't allow me to see. My father was asleep and snoring, but everyone else was laughing. It sounded like more happiness than I'd ever heard in the house. I peeked around the corner and saw my cousins losing their shit. I looked to the screen and saw a man dressed in red leather, standing alone and holding a microphone. He was just gesturing and speaking, and my cousins were in hysterics. I didn't know before that a movie could be just one person speaking and still be so funny. I wanted to laugh too, but I had to stay quiet so I could watch. I remember being at school afterward and hearing older kids reciting from that movie, Eddie Murphy Delirious, and feeling good about myself because I knew what they were talking about. My parents were both big fans of stand-up comedy. Dad loved Red Fox, Robin Harris, and Richard Pryor. Mum would only listen to clean comedians like Sinbad and Bill Cosby. I have vague memories of watching videos of these comics on stage telling jokes. I had no idea back then that my life would come full circle and I'd have a career doing the exact thing that brought my parents so much joy. The last memories. One afternoon, my brother and I were in the schoolyard shooting hoops. When my dad met us there, he overheard my brother talking about how good he was at basketball, so dad challenged him to a game. The thing is, my dad's not athletic in any way, shape, or form. But he's desperate and ruthless, and in a sport with no referee, that's an advantage. So he started playing jailhouse basketball, fouling my brother hard and elbowing him in the face. My brother, who was confused and angry that dad was being so aggressive with him, won easily anyway. After the game, dad walked off, then returned 10 minutes later holding his pit bull on a chain. He looked hard at my brother, said, "Sick I am, Fats," and then let go of the chain. Now, we'd heard of this pit bull because he was legendary in the neighborhood. My dad had taught him to snatch pocketbooks. He'd send Fats after some woman and she'd start running. He'd charge after her, knock her off balance, grab her purse in his fangs, and then follow my dad for a few blocks until the coast was clear and my dad could take the pocketbook from him and go through it. As soon as we saw that dog, my brother and I took off running, climbing a nearby fence and clinging to the top while Fats barked and snarled below. This dog was not playing, it was full on vicious. My dad just stood there and laughed. "He ain't gonna bite you," he yelled up at us. "Stop acting like bitches." To this day, I can't comprehend why he'd sick an attack dog on his own kids just because he lost at basketball. The only reason I can think of is that, in his mind, dad never loses, so he had to win in some way. As my mum found out about these adventures, she became more and more reluctant to let my dad pick us up from school or take us pretty much anywhere. He'd beg and plead with my mum, "Yo, I'm sick of not being able to do anything for my kids." Eventually, he wore her down, and she let him take me to camp. She would soon regret this. Instead of asking my mum for information about the camp, my dad picked me up in his car and asked, "You know where you gotta go to camp at?" Overconfident even back then, I said, "Yep. All right, let's go." My dad began driving, and at every intersection, he'd ask, "Which way do I turn?" I'd point very confidently, "That way." Eventually, completely by chance, we came upon a school. "This it?" "Yep." He stopped, and before I jumped out of the car, he gave me a pep talk. "Hey, man, we all got big dicks. So listen, you gonna be cool for the rest of your life." "What are you talking about, Dad?" "Listen, you see this long dick here?" He gestured to the outline in his sweatpants. He never wore drawers, so he was always flowing loose. "You gonna grow one too, so you never gotta worry about nothing." Okay, Dad." I jumped out of the car. He didn't wait until I got inside or he saw an adult. He and his long dick just peeled off and sped away. I walked in carrying a brown sack with my lunch in it. A priest came up to me and asked what I was there for. I was in some kind of Catholic summer school. He brought me to an office and nobody there could figure out who I was. They kept checking different sheets of paper and records. Time passed. Just eat your lunch while we figure this out, one of the priests told me. Eventually, he figured it out. Son, you don't go here. They asked who dropped me off and I said it was my dad. Where is he? I don't know his address. What about your mum? Unfortunately for my dad, I knew her number at work. They called her and my mum got in touch with my dad and cussed him out. For some reason, my father couldn't pick me up, so the priest walked me back to my dad's house. As soon as my dad saw us, he said, "Son, you told me that's where you went to camp. You gotta stop doing that." In his mind, he was never at fault, it was always something stupid I did. Maybe that's how I learned to have a sense of humor about myself. After all this, I could have gotten angry. What kind of dad lets an 8-year-old drive a motorboat basically unsupervised? What kind of dad sucks a dog on his kids after losing at basketball? What kind of dad leaves a kid outside the random church and just takes off without even checking to make sure it's the right place? What kind of dad makes so many enemies that people fight him in the streets when he's with his children? His craziness could have landed me in the hospital or the grave. Fuck him, and fuck anyone else who's on a power trip like that. I could have taken that road and thought those things. At every moment in life, there is a fork in the path you are on. And you can choose to go right or you can choose to go left. Every right you take leads you closer to your best possible destiny, every left leads you further away from it. These forks are not just decisions that lead to actions, like saying yes to a job offer, but thoughts that lead to beliefs, like blaming your father for ruining your life. Your life today is the sum total of your choices. So if you're not happy with it, look back at your choices and start making different ones. Even if you are struck by lightning and injured, you made choices that led you to that spot at that particular time, and you get to choose how you feel about it afterward. You can be angry at the bad luck that you got struck or grateful for the good luck that you survived. I've made a lot of rights that led me to where I am today, and choosing to appreciate my crazy ass father was one of them. I also made a lot of lefts in the following years that hurt and limited me. One of my goals in life is to learn from my lefts so I can take more rights. I never made it to camp that day with my dad. When he took me home after the whole mess, he warned, "I'm about to hear your mother's mouth when I get home. So after I drop you off, I don't know when the next time I'm gonna see you again will be, because your mother's gonna be trippin'." Quote. He was right. After my mum shut the door on him that day, she didn't give him another chance to take me anywhere else. The door to childhood adventure was closed for good. But that was my right-hand path. Life lessons from mum. Hard lessons are only hard to the weak who can't survive them. And to me,